Hello. Hello. Hi. Welcome to Stories from the Earth. Hope everyone is doing well today. My name is Jennifer, and before we go into our interview today, I'd like to briefly say why I'm doing these interviews. So the practice of herbalism is as diverse and dynamic as each individual herb and each individual herbalist. So there are many ways to be an herbalist, many ways to interact with the plant world. Each herbalist takes their own path. This series explores the many ways to be an herbalist and who an herbalist is, as well as a discussion on herbalism today, where it might be going in the future. So today we are going to talk all about the womb and how to heal it. We are going to be talking about herbs and herbalism in a more general sense. And I'd like to introduce someone who's very cool. She's the founder of the Womb Center Healing Temple. She's a massage therapist, a doula, and an herbal medicine woman. And so I'd like to introduce Sama Morningstar. So hi, good morning.
Hi.
It's very early for you. Sama is in California, so she is our first West Coast herb person that I'll be interviewing.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, you're welcome. If anyone has any questions for Sama, please put them in the comments in capitals, all caps, so I can be able to see them. So I make sure I don't miss them. And we'll make sure to try to get to everyone's questions. So my first question is just briefly describe what the womb-centered healing temple is and what led to you to create it.
Well, the Womb-Centered Healing Temple is an online space, an online temple space for where womb-centered healing is supported and nurtured. And it's a collaborative space based on, I don't know if you've ever been to like an in-person healing center where a bunch of different healing therapists or even doctors and nurses or, any kind of practitioners come together and pool resources to create a space around a particular type of healing modality or healing purpose or focus. I was particularly inspired by a place like this called the Goddess House in Glastonbury. I had taken a pilgrimage a few years back to assist a mentor of mine, a womb awakening mentor, and she was a practitioner in a place called the Goddess House in Glastonbury, UK. And I took some time for my own visionary wisdom gathering and wisdom generating around how I was to deliver my teachings to the world. And I was very inspired by the Goddess House, and I did a whole ceremonial meditative process about what I was to create. And that's what I received, is this image of an online space similar to the Goddess House, but as a womb-centered healing temple. And that would gather other womb-centered healing practitioners.
Okay.
And it would be a place that I could share my work. I knew I was going to be creating my own unique healing modality that was centered in the womb, and that there are lots of other practitioners that were also doing that, and that to have a sanctuary, a place where we could, offer events, collaborative events, offer our courses and things like that, have an online space. So that, and I've been working on that for several years now.
That's cool. I feel like a lot of times in our mainstream medicine that often, you go to your doctor, but, that's all you see. And I feel like, it's missing these pieces, the that these other healing modalities bring in. And I just love the way that, I just love that idea of bringing several practitioners together to create that space. So that's really cool. Mm-hmm. And I don't think there's too much out there that's focused on the womb. So also really awesome. Cool. Okay, so why is it so important to have womb wellness?
Well, the answer to this question is so obvious that it escapes most people, especially since we've been suppressing this wisdom for so long in our society. So the womb is where we all come from. It's where we're formed. It's where we develop our body, and our spirit becomes embodied, and it's where our emotional well-being begins. And so the way we're conceived and what happens while we're being gestated and when we're born create a blueprint for our life. Okay. And so, for example, I often ask people, do you know for certain whether or not your mother had an orgasm during the sexual act in which you were conceived?
I don't think most people know that.
Most people don't know this.
I don't know that.
It's a taboo topic to even think about our mother's pleasure, or our mother's orgasmic pleasure. People don't even know or even want to think about whether or not their mother's having an orgasm in general. And yet we are designed for orgasm to be the beginning of life. And we're suppressing this in our psyches and in our society. We're suppressing this female orgasm as the beginning of life. And so we're suppressing life itself. And it's very self-destructive from the beginning. It's very self-destructive. And then from then on out, it's the same thing. And so as when we're developing in the womb, in whatever ways our mother's pleasure and well-being is being thwarted or suppressed or unsupported or neglected, usually all of the above in one way or another, that's how much our life, the development of our life, is being thwarted, neglected, unsupported. All of those things. And this has been going on for many, many generations. And so we're inheriting that. And then on top of that, any stressful, traumatic circumstances that our mother or our parents might be in when we're developing in the womb and then throughout our childhood. And we learn that when we're in our mother's womb. So womb bearers learn that the womb is a stressful place. Everyone learns that the womb is a stressful place and where stress and pain is held. Because it's the one place in our body where we can hold something that keeps growing bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and hold it in, right? And so we're also taught in our society to hold in our emotions, especially the painful and difficult ones. And so for those of us with wombs, the best place to hold in those difficult, painful emotions is the womb. And we're taught also not to support the natural releasing and process of the womb, which is a wonderful model for how to be with our emotions, that we build ourselves up and feel what's really going on and hold it for a moment to really understand what's going on, gather the wisdom, the nourishment from whatever emotion we're feeling, and then we release it, right? That's the whole menstrual cycle. But we're taught to hold it in. And this is why a lot of people have trouble with menstruation, why menstruation gets so stagnant, why we have menstrual cramps, why we have a whole host of painful, difficult menstrual symptoms. And most people start having those symptoms from the moment they start menstruating, because those patterns of holding things in, not being allowed to release, have started from the get-go. I'm creating a workbook about this called Herbal Womb Wisdom. And I just...
yes, I saw that you were.
Yeah, and so I'm creating like checklists, for people to assess, where the original sources of some of these patterns are. And one of the questions that I put on there that's much more common than we would, when we look at it, it's like, wow, how common is this? How many people, when they were children, and maybe this you can answer this question for yourself, were told at some point that it's not okay to cry, and were even threatened to be hurt more if they didn't stop crying. Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. Right? So children are being threatened that they're going to get hurt more, or actually are hurt more for expressing their emotions. Punished for expressing their emotions. So at a very early age, we're being taught that it's not okay to feel and express emotions, and we learn to stuff it and hold it inside, and the womb is it's a favorite place of doing so. So then by the time young girls are starting to menstruate, they've already got these patterns of holding things inside. They've already developed this shame, or
gosh,
menstruation.
I remember a video that we watched in like middle school where this girl was, I take a shower every day during my period, like she's extra dirty, and I remember that, and it was this thing that you didn't talk about, and it was this thing that you hid. So definitely, yeah.
And so then that's when young girls' self-esteem plummets. And, oftentimes all the unhealthy patterns of being in our emotions, with our nutrition and our food habits and our lifestyle habits, it becomes the menstrual cycle tells us how out of balance we really are. And yet, as we start menstruating, we're told that that's just normal. That's just part of being a woman, and we just have to accept this pain and suffering. And for many menstruators, it's excruciating. And there's no information shared. And those who have it really bad end up getting put on birth control pills, which causes more and more health detriment throughout their lives. And so, there's just so much misinformation and abuse around the menstrual cycle that it's affecting our health and well-being across the board. And the science is in of how important the menstrual cycle is as a vital sign, and it has so much more information in it than even the other vital signs like your heart rate, your body temperature, and things like that. That you just take one reading of, and that's the information you get. The menstrual cycle has months worth of detailed, nuanced, rich information about what's going on with the person's body. But the doctor usually, if they ask about your menstrual cycle, usually they do in the intake. When you go, when was the last one? No, nothing about what your symptoms are, nothing, no recognition of how the menstrual symptoms are actually giving us a ton of information about our overall health and well-being. In fact, people have written whole books about it. I keep one right here by my thing. This is one of my favorite. It's called The Vital Sign. And it's all about the menstrual cycle by Lisa Hendrickson Jack. And I've interviewed her several times on my podcast, and it's very well researched. She's found probably most of the research that's been done on the menstrual cycle and included it in the book. And there's lots of medical research that has been done, but most doctors, even gynecologists, have not been briefed or do not keep themselves up to date and don't include it in how they address their patients. And there are probably some out there that do, inform themselves about the menstrual cycle. And I'm very grateful for those of any of us listeners who might happen to have a medical doctor who does pay more attention to the menstrual cycle, but the norm is that that's not the case. And so I always tell my clients who come to me, I offer womb wellness assessments, free womb wellness assessments. And those who come to me with that, I share here on your call that to get better support around a healthy menstrual cycle and a healthy womb, you're more likely going to find the support that you need in traditions like Ayurvedic medicine or traditional Chinese medicine, acupuncturists or traditional Chinese herbalists or Western herbalists even. Some, are more inclined to have information and help for menstrual and womb ailments. And I'm actually a vaginal steam facilitator, a certified vaginal steam facilitator. And vaginal steaming is an ancient practice that is still intact.
I definitely, I'm sorry, I do want to ask you about that. But first, when you mention traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic, that leads me to my next question, which is, how would you use herbs? Because we are, primarily here talking about herbs and also wellness, but to promote womb health, both in your practice and then if you have any experience with some other traditions.
Yeah. So
and we can talk about vaginal steaming. That probably goes right in with this.
Yeah, that's right in there. So one thing I like to emphasize when people ask about herbs for healing specific ailments, herbalism in any tradition, whether it's Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic medicine or, Western herbalism, it comes from a different perspective. It's standing on a different foundation than Western medicine. Allopathic medicine is a term that we use for that. Allopathic medicine operates with the mechanical model of healing that sees the body like a machine. Okay. And that if something's not working, you either need to remove that part and replace it, or you need to add some substance that will force that part to resume good functioning. Okay. It doesn't recognize or support the human body's natural ability to heal itself. Yeah. Because a machine can't heal itself, right? A car, if something's broken, you have to remove or replace the part, you have to repair the part mechanically, or you have to add some kind of substance that might have run out or things like that, right? So it's very mechanical, and there's no recognition, because in a machine, it doesn't heal itself. It's entirely up to the mechanic to fix the machine, right? So that's where the medical model goes. So if you're thinking about herbalism in the medical model, because that's how most of us have been trained, then you think that herbs are some substance that if you add it to the body, it will immediately start to make whatever's not working function better. And that's not the model that herbalism is about. Okay.
Right. So it's about, it just looks at things a different way. I mean, if you need a kidney transplant, that allopathic method is good. But if you need to support your kidney, so maybe down the road you don't need a kidney transplant, then herbalism, and it definitely holds a very different but very important role in the healing process. That's how I feel about it, and that's why I think it's so cool.
Well, and the thing is that by the time you've gotten to the point where you need a kidney transplant, your body has probably been telling you for many years that something was off in your kidneys. And then you get to the point where you need a kidney transplant. So the mechanical model is really very crisis oriented, and it profits off of us not knowing how to take care of our health and well-being all along the way up until the point where we have a crisis and we need to go to the surgeon and get a transplant, right?
And that's why I think that so many people are so interested in, herbs, herbal medicine, this type of thing, so that we don't have to do that. Right.
And so the model of herbalism is more along the lines, what I describe it as is the wise woman way, the wise woman way. Okay. So if you think about a wise woman, you might imagine or have an ancient memory or a fairy tale image of an old wrinkly woman who lives out in the woods, out the edge of town.
Most definitely.
And she has a garden and she's mixing something in her pot that may smell good, may smell kind of nasty. And you come and she gives you something to drink when you're not feeling well, or she talks to you about your life and gives you a wise suggestion, or just makes an offhanded comment that lands somewhere in you that becomes this wisdom that you go back and implement in your life, and then you feel better, right? And there's all kinds of mythological stories and folktale stories about the wise woman. Well, this is because these were the healers in ancient times and still are to this day. And the people who had the wisdom about childbirth, the midwives, the basic day-to-day how to take care of ourselves. And this practice and approach to healing was suppressed and annihilated in many cultures, whether it was indigenous European cultures or indigenous African or indigenous Native American or other places in the world where indigenous cultures were suppressed, primarily to create the possibility to profit in a big way from health and well-being, or from people getting sick because they don't have that day-to-day nourishing wisdom of the wise women, and therefore getting sick and not knowing who to go to and letting it get worse and worse and worse because not having the information of how to care for themselves. And then in comes the heroic, mechanical, very expensive medical system to save you when it gets really bad, right? So it was a deliberate strategy to create, to monetize and commodify our health and our well-being, and it was profit oriented from the get-go to disconnect people from the land so that only rich people could own the land and charge rent from people that didn't own the land. And I mean, it's just this ongoing thing that we could talk about. So that's why a lot of this wisdom was lost, was because of that profit-oriented, the very, very rich getting richer and richer and richer, and the common people getting poorer and poorer and having less and less of our indigenous wisdom. And so herbalism has always been sort of a thorn in the side of the profit-oriented medical system, and has been suppressed because of that. And so it takes a minute. That's why we don't have any kind of certification or licensing for herbalists in the United States.
Right. Yeah.
And this has been, it's different in other countries. In India and in China and Asia, that long-standing tradition of traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine never got suppressed in the same way, never got annihilated in the same way as European traditions did. And so there are ancient systems with thousands and thousands of years of wisdom and understanding still intact that include an understanding and recognition of how important the menstrual cycle is. And that's why I recommend going to doctors of that nature, because that wisdom is still intact. Whereas in the modern medicine world, that wisdom is dismissed. The understanding of the menstrual cycle has been dismissed, and it's been annihilated because of the persecution of the midwives and the herbalists in the European lineage. So there's a big reclaiming of this wisdom as the limitations of Western medicine are becoming excruciatingly clearer and clearer over the years. And there's this resurgence of desire for this knowledge and wisdom. And so the Wise Woman Way says that we are whole in and of ourselves. Our bodies know how to heal ourselves. We have the wisdom within us. Each individual has the wisdom within us that tells us how to heal ourselves, and that we can communicate with plants and always have been able to receive the wisdom of the plants and have direct communication with the plants. And that's how we learned about herbs in the first place. And that's how I personally started learning about herbs, is having an herbalist set the stage out in the forest at an herbal gathering for us to go and connect with a plant and have direct communication. It was much easier than I thought. I mean, we didn't have to go into some heavy trance. We didn't have to drink a fancy tea or breathe a smelly smoke for a long period of time. No, we just said, okay, you're going to relax. You're going to let your eyes go soft. You're going to walk across the earth toward imagining that you can feel that you're being drawn somewhere. Right? Using the imagination as a valid tool instead of dismissing it like most people do. Oh, I'm just imagining things, right? So then it's not valid. Well, no, the imagination is a valid tool. So imagining that you can feel something pulling you towards it, arriving at a plant, and then having a conversation with the plant, or imagining that you're having a conversation with a plant. That's what we did. Lo and behold, we all take our information back to the teacher and say what we imagined talking to the plant about. And then she pulls out her herbalism book and says, that plant is good for exactly what it told you it was good for. And that plant is good for exactly what it told you it was good for, And so,
yeah.
So it's still intact, and it doesn't take a huge altering of consciousness or anything like that. It just takes a shift in how we're looking at things and an activation of our innate powers to connect with other living beings and communicate with other living beings, and that we have this intrinsic ability to heal ourselves, to know what's best for us inside of ourselves. So again, it's a shift from the authoritarian model of the doctor being up here and having more knowledge than you do and telling you what you should do and what you shouldn't do, and that, not listen to your own wisdom, but to listen to the wisdom of the doctor. Right? That's the authoritarian model. And the herbalism model is a partnership model, where the herbalist might have studied and communed with plants more than you and might have information to share with you. But the herbalist in the partnership model is going to invite you to activate your own wisdom and feel for yourself in your body what feels right and true and wise. And if they feel right and true, and if you feel right and true and wise about taking any information from the herbalist and trying it out for yourself and working as a partner in your healing process with the herbalist and coming together and say, help me come up with a plan and a strategy for healing myself, and the herbalist engages with you in that plan. But ultimately, that herbalist is not an authority, but a partner in your healing process. So this is how I like to work with my people. And so, for example, with vaginal steaming is one of the approaches to ingesting the herbs. So we can ingest the herbs by taking them through our mouths. We can ingest the herbs topically by absorbing it through our skin. So you may have heard of things like, well, lotions and creams are an excellent way that, you know, the skin is our biggest organ of absorption and elimination. So we absorb tons through our skin. If you think about the mouth and the digestive system, the mouth on the inside is covered by a mucous membrane, but it's skin inside your mouth, and all along inside your throat and your digestive tract, it's skin inside you that's absorbing nutrients, and then it's helping to your digestive tract helps to digest and break down the nutrients in your food and other things. So ingesting it through your mouth is one way, but so many people have digestive problems that sometimes we lose ability to absorb. And so because we weren't breastfed and our digestive tract wasn't developed properly when we were babies to start. So this is another thing, breastfeeding. And that has been suppressed as soon as somebody figured out how to make baby formula and start profiting from the need to feed babies. That's when doctors were inundated with misinformation. And I just did an interview with a breastfeeding advocate on my podcast, and she was talking about research that she's done, and she found out that the people who are funding the medical school's education of OBGYNs are the baby formula people. And so doctors get zero education about breastfeeding and how to set new moms up for breastfeeding, zero. And so all you get from most doctors, unless they've gone and educated themselves in addition to what they received in medical school, all you get is whatever their family tradition was, or whatever their opinion is, or, you know, but then we see them as the authority over here, right? And the doctor says, oh, well, you just do this about breastfeeding. And it's not based on any evidence or any actual understanding of breastfeeding.
I know that my husband's wife was, I think there might be a trend back to people feeling like it's important just on their own, because he was very upset that she couldn't do more breastfeeding because she had low milk. And I remember there's a whole conversation with her and her friends. I mean, I follow them on Facebook, so like I was just sort of a bystander to that and just sort of observing. And she was just totally crushed. So I think that perhaps women are sort of taking this upon themselves to sort of.
And that has happened all along. But even the information that says she had low milk, all women start out with very little milk because the baby's stomach is small and can only ingest a small amount of milk. And then as breastfeeding women let their babies feed on demand, the baby's stomach slowly grows at the same rate as the woman's ability to increase breast production. So there are methods that you can learn from a lactation consultant of just the frequency of breastfeeding, and strategies for healthily developing the baby's ability to digest more milk and the mother's ability to produce more milk. Just that alone, that information helps, just eliminates most people's low milk status. Okay. And that low milk status is often coming from misinformation from the doctors that don't really know what's going on because they haven't learned, they haven't been taught about breastfeeding. Now, there are some people that have difficulty producing enough milk, and perhaps it's because they're nutritionally deficient, which is very common. And if they had been paying attention to their menstrual cycles before getting pregnant, they may have noticed signs of that nutritional deficiency and started to address it. And this is another reason, coming back to why womb wellness is so important, that, you know, having a healthy womb, if you are going to have children, is going to make it more possible to easily get pregnant and to gestate a healthy baby and to be able to healthfully breastfeed your baby and have vibrant health all along your child's development as a healthy mother. Whereas if you're already limping along with barely being able to conceive and like that, because your menstrual cycle would have told you that. If you have lots of difficult menstrual symptoms, that's a sign that your womb isn't healthy. And I remember the first time that somebody told me something similar about my digestion. If you have digestive distress, gas all the time, bloating all the time, things like that, it's not normal. That's a sign of not being healthy, that something's not quite right, that some foods you're eating or something that's going on needs attention. Whereas we're taught to just ignore those kinds of symptoms until it turns into a huge crisis. And, you know, and not question anything about our lives as the source of our illness, right?
Yeah, exactly. So going back to herbs, what would you say are some herbs that have like a real affinity for the womb that maybe you use in your practice? And then if somebody maybe wanted to, you know, sort of create a healthier, promote a healthier womb, what are some of like simple things that maybe they could do at home?
Well, I'll share the herbs that I first learned about back when I was first learning about herbalism and womb health. And the two herbs that I used to make an infusion with, actually three, were nettles, red raspberry leaf, and licorice root. Now, licorice root is an herb that you might not want to be drinking every day forever. It's one that you would want to take a break from periodically. And some say that nettles you would also want to take a break from periodically as well. But in general, nettles and raspberry root are more on the more nutritional side of things. So, and just having this shift from herbs being like a drug, like you would get from that authoritarian doctor, that mechanical doctor that's trying to add something to force your body to function properly again. What we can shift to seeing herbs as is nutrition that nourishes our organs and our systems in our body to bring ourselves in our wholeness and our ability to heal ourselves. That's intrinsic in our biology. It nourishes those systems back into wholeness. And I'll never forget what my first herbal teacher told us and talked to us about was that our food sources are very deficient in nutrients because of the ways that we've been treating the soil agriculturally and because of the ways that we've been exploiting the earth in our agricultural practices and stripping the soil of nutrients. And then on top of that, most foods are then processed even more and stripped even more of nutrients. So if we're eating anything that comes in a box or
eating cardboard or something,
right, there's no nutrients left in it. But even if you're eating the healthiest, freshest, organic fruits and vegetables and animal products, they are deficient in nutrients because of the ways that we've been treating the soil for generations, okay? And we haven't replenished the soil yet. Even the organic farms, it's going to take a while for those soils to be fully regenerated. And a lot of mass-produced organic produce aren't really participating in soil regeneration. And they might not be even 100% organic, especially wheat products, because the organic inspector comes around and tests things maybe once a year or once every few years. And some of the more commercial organic producers are still slipping in non-organic methods that don't show up on the test next year, right? So that's why a lot of people are showing up as gluten intolerant or having allergies to wheat and other grains, because there are sprays, non-organic sprays, that are being used right as the wheat is fattest, and ready to harvest, to give it one last burst of growth to increase yields.
So you may actually be allergic to the spray
as opposed to the wheat itself. And because many people who are intolerant to wheat here in the United States go to Italy, for example, where those practices aren't done or haven't been done up until perhaps recently. They've started doing that, but and suddenly they can eat the pastas and the breads and things in Italy, but can't eat them here in the United States, because these toxic practices, even organic, are utilizing these practices to increase yields. Yeah.
Right. So you're right. So right, Heather.
Yeah. And so here we are with nutritional deficiency, which actually for a lot of people is the cause of overeating and eating disorders and obesity, because we're eating all this food, but we're not getting the nutrition that we need. And so then we're eating more because we still on some level register this hunger that's not being satisfied. And so we're eating more and more of these, nutritionally stripped foods. And so what the herbs bring is, most herbs are grown in very different ways. Most herbs are, they actually give nutrition back to the soil. And you can't grow herbs in that nutrient stripping manner. Most herbs are grown on farms where the herbs are perennial and they grow year after year, and they drop their leaves, once a year or like that, and nourish the soil again and come back. And so herb farming is a completely different thing. And it actually gives nutrients back to the soil, and the herbs can access nutrients from the soil in different ways in the fruits and vegetables. Like, I'm an herb gardener, and mostly I started becoming more and more of an herb gardener because the herbs don't need me to do a whole lot of work so that they can grow.
That's what I like.
Yeah.
I mean, especially better even if you can like wildcraft it, because you just go out and find them.
Exactly.
And then they do their thing and everything else. Or like my friend, her whole garden got accidentally covered in mugwort. She had like this huge garden and there you go, bam, but it, also she had dock and all kinds of other stuff. So they just grow. I mean, they're so easy. They're too easy to access.
Yeah. And that's because they can, often what happens is that whatever nutrient deficiency there is in the soil, the herbs that can replenish that soil start to grow there.
That's cool.
And so having a wild herb garden, and that's what I have. I have several herbs that I give permission to grow wherever they like, and I know that I can harvest them and they'll come back, and they're replenishing the soil and they're building the soil. And that's a long-term process to rebuild disturbed soil. And so they're going to be around for a while. And then different herbs will come in. Like a couple of years ago, suddenly evening primrose was growing there, and I didn't plant it. It had never grown there before. And so beautiful evening primrose had joined the garden, and now it's all over the place in the garden, right? And I've got clary sage and feverfew and catnip, and of course the mint family spreads all over the place. So
I mean, that's a very neat gardening philosophy, which I haven't heard it described quite fully like that. I feel like I am sort of been thinking along those lines, but you sort of just are really had it more fully developed, and I like that a lot. Just sort of letting them do their, you can plant a couple and just letting them do their thing. And I heard from another herbalist that herbs move around. So like, like with the primrose, it wasn't there and then it's there, and
now it's in different spots in the garden than it was. Yeah. And I even deliberately sprinkled some of the seeds. And that's one thing that many gardeners don't do is, when you're just doing vegetable gardens, it's considered a bad thing when your veggies start going to seed, because oftentimes, like if the broccoli has gone to flower, or the lettuce, for example, bolts and goes to flower and starts making seed, you can no longer, the lettuce and the broccoli is no longer very edible. Okay, it doesn't taste like the broccoli that we know that we get at the store. The lettuce doesn't taste like the broccoli we get at the store. And so most people pull those broccolis and those lettuces out and get rid of them, hopefully composting them to put the nutrients back into the soil. But some people don't even do that. And then you're missing the beauty of they will make their own seeds and make new plants all on their own. If you just let one lettuce plant go to seed, then as soon as it's
a different lettuce or something,
suddenly you have lettuce going everywhere. Same with arugula, same with your broccoli and your kales and your cauliflowers, although the brassicas will cross-pollinate each other, so then you get all kind of odd, weird varieties. If you
sounds fun.
And it's very fun and exciting. And so I like to let my plants have their full life cycle and go to seed. And so there you have suddenly now I have a whole family of evening primrose. And, and some say, oh, those plants are so weedy, take them out. And that's a lot of work to be so in control of the garden. In fact, I had to leave a community garden because there were people who were really asserting this controlled approach to gardening, that everything had to be in straight rows and you couldn't grow anything that was going to possibly drop seeds in someone else's plot, and you had to do the composting in such a way that you were cutting everything up to be this exact size and putting it in such a way. And I said, let's just compost naturally happens. And they were like, well, that's how it happens in the forest. And I'm like, yeah, so what's wrong with that?
Do we want it to happen like in the forest? I mean,
yeah, right. Wouldn't we want that? Like, that's great. Yeah, it happens like that in the forest. Yeah, let's do it,
Even if I wanted things so perfect and straight rows like that, my life just doesn't.
It doesn't.
Do that. I mean, and I also have ADD, so it's just like things are just randomly I am not in a neat straight row ever.
Yeah.
It's really rare that
yeah.
Yeah, and I don't want a garden definitely like that, yeah. and some of those weeds are actually good. So.
Oh my goodness, I have a bumper crop of wild lettuce this year.
Nice.
And wild lettuce, for those of you who don't know, is often considered a very obnoxious weed. And in that garden, that community garden, it was like they would invade my garden space to dig up the wild lettuce because I was like, go to seed, because this is like my friend. And it's really good herbally and even nutritionally when it's young. I would pull it up, cut it up, put it in my salads, put it in my greens, my steamed veggies, my stir fries, all that kind of stuff. It's super nutritious. It's pulling, it's bringing nutrients out of the soils that your regular lettuce can't even access, because your regular lettuce from the grocery store is used to having nutrient poor soils, and it's used to having, super readily available nutrients, sort of spoon fed to it. and it can't access, the hidden nutrients in the soils. And so when we eat more wild nutrition in these more wild herb gardens, it creates resilience in us so that we can receive the nutrients of life that it might be hidden or inaccessible otherwise.
Yeah. Heather says, I have beautiful blue mountain lettuce I love in my garden. So Heather, who I've been putting her little comments on, she has a beautiful garden, and she converted a carport. So it's just like very gravelly, awful, and it just is lovely now, and it's slowly sort of, reclaiming that space. That was cool.
Yeah, the number of wild herbs that are growing in my garden, I could list off, and it's just very rich. And in fact, last fall, I did some womb-centered ceremonial work in the garden in a new way. And I've always been doing that. So one of the things that I love doing and have been doing for many, many years is giving my menstrual blood to the garden and to the plants. And last fall, and particularly roses, I have a very intimate relationship with roses. Roses go back to ancient times as the flower of the feminine power. Okay, and feminine spirituality. So roses are associated with Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene, and there's whole mystery school lineages that are called the lineage of the rose and things like that. And so, and I have my own mystery school, so roses are very much part of that. I put roses on my altar every day that I can, and like that. So, and I collect all the rose petals and I use them in my herbal medicine, and rose petals are another medicine, herbal nutrition and helper for womb health and for the menstrual cycle. So I would add that as another simple one. And you can make a beautiful rose tea. You can make rose water by putting rose petals in a jar. I wouldn't use rose petals that you got at a florist, because those may have been sprayed by who knows what to keep the bugs out. But if you have roses in your garden, or roses in a friend's garden that they're not sprayed, okay, and they're not spraying with anything, shake it out a minute first, the rose itself, to get any bugs out, okay, because earwigs love to hang out in your roses, and plenty of other bugs love to be in the roses. So make sure you get the bugs out, and then put your rose petals in a jar with cold water and put it in the fridge. And after 7 days, you have this wonderful rose water elixir that you can drink or you can use as a spray. It doesn't smell exactly like the rose water that you get at the store, because that comes from a special distillation process, but you need tons of roses to get it to be that strong. But it's lovely smell.
And that's usually just topical. You can buy rose water to, like, the rose water that you might be familiar with is also the culinary rose water, where you put like cakes and stuff, and that's in a different section. That's usually in like the baking section. But this is sort of like a little homemade combo of the rose water that you can drink.
Right. And those other rose waters, commercial rose waters, are usually much more concentrated. Even though they're still edible, roses are definitely edible.
You just don't want to swig it,
Yeah, it'd be a little strong if you swigged it. But if you make this rose water in your fridge, or even, and it's quite different if you actually make it like a tea and put the petals in a teapot or in a jar and pour hot water over it, you get a different kind of flavor, but you're still getting the medicine of the roses.
Yeah, so Heather's asking, do you have a favorite variety?
I have several favorites. I love Cecil Brunner. Cecil Brunner is a climbing rose, and it makes all those little pink roses, and it makes a huge amount of roses. So that's where I get the bulk of my rose petals each year. Another favorite of mine is Double Delight. and it's beautiful, with a creamy center and bright pink fringes around the edges. Yeah, and then I have some other variety. Don Juan is another variety that I love. That's a deep red rose. So those are you get the pinks to the deep reds. But really, any rose at all is wonderful.
I think we have a lot in my neighborhood. Somebody across the street has this lovely trellis, and I think those climbing roses are on it because they're little small pink ones, and they're just.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't done an identification on them, but like it sounds like what you're talking about, and they're just they're gorgeous. One other question, Elaine wants to know how many any amounts of rose petals to water, or does it matter?
Well, that's really to preference. Like if you just have one rose and you want to put all the petals from one multi-layered rose into a pint jar with water or a quart jar with water, that's going to be a different strength of rose water at the end, or rose tea. If you put hot water over it, it's going to be a different strength than if you had two roses, or like, and the general rule of thumb for teas and infusions is if you have dried herbs, you want to use 1 tablespoon per cup. And if you have fresh herbs, you want to use 3 tablespoons per cup, because that's how much they have all that much water in it, so that they're bigger in size for the amount of herbs that you're getting. But that's a general rule of thumb. Over the years, I put more and more herbs in my teas, and they get stronger and stronger because I want that rich nutrition.
I have like 4 tea bags in here.
I don't even use tea bags really anymore, because the thing with tea bags is that they've been, it's good, it's convenient,
It's convenient.
There's teas that you just grab a box from the store because you want to have that particular variety. There's a couple of brands that make varieties that I love that I'll sometimes get tea bags, but oftentimes they have less potency and less flavor in them. They've been ground up. The more you grind up or process an herb, the more nutrition it's losing, the longer it's sitting on the shelf. So that with tea bags, they've gone through quite a bit of processing, mechanical processing, to get them in the tea bags. There's not somebody sitting and putting the tea into that tea bag by hand. No, there's a machine that's grinding it up and putting it in each tea bag and folding the tea bag. And the more that's happening and moving around through the machinery and getting into a box and sitting on a shelf in the factory until it goes to the stores, the more nutrients it's losing.
I know I had an herb teacher, she said you need like 6 tea bags.
Right.
So, I mean, this is, it's Tulsi, and then I have turmeric.
And I just get bulk herbs, and I put all my herbs that I want in my tea in a big pot on the stove, and I just keep adding water until it's not strong enough anymore. And maybe sometimes I'll add more herbs, or I'll dump the dregs into the garden and make a fresh pot. So I constantly have a big pot of tea brewing on the stove.
Like my mom makes chicken soup, she sort of does the same thing. She keeps it on the stove.
Right.
And just turns it on and then eats up, and it's just, she keeps it on. She just turns it on every day, heats it up, and then eats it.
There's a term for that called bouillabaisse for a pot of soup or stew that you're constantly adding to and boiling on the stove. And well, just you get more flavors and more flavors develop, and it turns into this whole alchemical process. That's what happens with my tea, because on a given day, I know what the basic tea blend is that's in there, but on any given day, I might feel the need for more roses, or more turmeric, or more, something for my stomach, some mint, or usually not mint, but more like marshmallow root or something like that, because I have an upset stomach. And so I'll put that I'll add that to the base of the tea until there's so many herbs in there that you can barely get any water in there anymore. And then I go dump the herbs and then start.
I mean, because you can't have too much tea. You just can't. So I know, like, so I used to work at the supplement department of a grocery store, and I was always talking about how to make a tea. Like, I'm like, these teas are great for flavor, but what I'm going to tell you about is how to make medicinal strength tea, which is a lot different.
Well, my
than
tea
what
is,
you're used to. And yours is even
it's more like a broth. It's more like a soup. It's a food. It's a food. You can almost chew it, It's so thick and rich with nutrition. And my husband does too. My husband goes even farther than I.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because then he goes and he adds, and I do some, like I will add powdered reishi directly into my cup of tea after straining out all the other herbs, and just getting the liquid.
Really
then I put powdered reishi in, and then that makes this, I'll stir it in so I'm getting it while I'm drinking it, but it always ends up with a little bit of sludge down at the bottom of the cup. But he doesn't only add powdered reishi. He adds whatever powdered herbs we have in jars on the counter. So that includes turmeric, cinnamon, powdered dandelion root. For a while, I didn't realize he was putting that directly. I use that to make dandelion coffee, but he's there scooping it.
Like the bitter.
He loves it all. And then he's got this slimy, because I don't know if you've ever had cinnamon tea from cinnamon powder. It makes a slimy goop.
No.
Quality. It has a very slimy quality. So then he's got this slimy goop at the bottom of his teacup that he's slurping down by the spoonful at the end of his teacup. And he's like, you can't let that go to waste. I'm like, no, I'll just add more tea and stir it in. But he's like, ooh.
He must like mucilage.
Well, he needs it, and he knows he has some health conditions, and he's very much on board with the whole herbal nutrition. I mean, he's taken it to. He's made it his own. Yeah. He still gets friends to ask him to ask his wife about the herbs, and I'm like, honey, you're an herbalist too now at this point.
My husband doesn't. He what he does is he makes this sort of Indian inspired like stew every week, and you can see him with the turmeric. He's like bam, 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 and the cumin, bam, 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 bam. So he just puts in so
we don't even bother with sprinkler
lids.
We just open the jar and take out tablespoons full. We just have it in mason jars. There's none of this little spice jars with the little sprinkler top. We don't have that anymore. Those disappear. Like, we even take, if we have one of those, my husband takes the sprinkler cap off and reaches in with the spoon. And so we just don't even bother. We just have mason jars, and we refill them with bulk bags.
Heather says she'd like to have tea at your house.
Yeah, come on over.
You have to. Well, Heather's in Tennessee, but we can drive.
Or we can have a virtual tea party. How's that?
We can have a virtual tea party. Cool. Okay, so what got you interested in herbs? Do you remember your first ooh, I want to, something here.
Yeah, I went to college at UC Davis, and I lived in a community of students called the Domes, or Baggins End. And this was an experimental housing project, which Davis is kind of known for its experimental housing projects. And some students got together and said, okay, how can we easily make dome houses and for students to live in? And so they made this community of 14 domes. And the way they made these domes was they made forms. They made like a mold, and then they sprayed this foam into the mold, and then the foam hardened, and then they turned them upside down. They had to use big machines because they're like, I don't know, maybe 25-foot diameter at the base, at the open part of the half dome, right? And so then 2 students would live in each dome. And I remember I was paying like $130 a month to live in the domes. And so there was 14 domes, so 28 people, and we all made food together, and it backed up against the student community gardens. So my roommate was a botanist. She was studying botany as an undergrad. And I learned from her and others that were studying agriculture, botany, or, other types of gardening, farming, different things. I learned how to garden, and my mom had gardened. And actually it goes even farther back than that, because my mom, when she was cooking, she would send me out to get rosemary or green beans or things like that. But I always remember going to the rosemary bush and picking a sprig of rosemary for the spaghetti sauce and letting it sit in there and make delicious spaghetti sauce. So it goes way back. But so becoming an herbalist myself, I was all involved in the community gardens, learning about herbs from the fellow gardeners. And then one day somebody said, hey, do you want to go to the Northern California Women's Herbal Symposium? This was back in 92 or something like that. And so I hop in a car with a couple of girlfriends, and we head up the coast to Laytonville, and we go to the Women's Herbal Symposium. And it was fantastic. That's where I had that experience where that teacher had us go walk, and I met Mullen. And Mullen told me that it would help me with my respiratory issues. I would have chronic coughs and sinus infections and things like that. That was before I stopped eating dairy. And stopping eating dairy actually helped me a lot more than Mullen. So that's why when I talk to people about herbs, if you're not removing the causes of whatever ailment, the herbs won't be able to really help you heal that ailment. You have to remove the causes of the ailment, as well as nourish the body to heal from that ailment with the herbs. So that's another difference to emphasize with herbalism, is that, you have to address the underlying cause. And so that's my workbook. I talk about, okay, are you assessing what this means and looking at the underlying causes and reflecting on how you can change, whether it's lifestyle choices, dietary choices, emotional states of well-being, what kind of additional therapies and healing do you need besides herbalism, in conjunction in communion with the nutrition from the herbs to nourish our bodies back towards wholeness. So, because if we're being emotionally abused, or if we have unresolved trauma, that shows up in our bodies. And the herbs can help with that, and do help with that. But often what happens is that the symptoms grow worse and become more pronounced. And then it's helpful to have practitioners that can help us process through if we don't have skills developed for that on our own, which most of us don't to start with. And so really developing our self-healing skills on all levels, emotionally, spiritually, as well as physically and biologically. So the herbs really point out the need for that if necessary. And it's not like, okay, this herb is going to take those symptoms away and they're never going to happen again. No, the herbs are going to nourish your body, your whole being, towards wellness. And oftentimes the symptom is your body's actual attempt at remedying an ailment. And sometimes that symptom has to grow worse in order for that ailment to be remedied. And sometimes that symptom will continue to grow worse until we change something about our lives. Like I had chronic sinus infections and respiratory illnesses until I stopped eating dairy.
And it's And then sometimes, you know, they've gotten to a point where maybe the herbs aren't enough, you know, you have to do a bigger shift.
Yeah.
And then later on you can just maintain, you know, unlike in your case, you probably are not going to go back to dairy, but like, you know, a lot of times you can sort of start sort of adding things a little bit back in. Right.
Well, and I have gone back to dairy on a few occasions, and very quickly it became clear that I was going to end up, you know, that even if it wasn't creating those chronic respiratory ailments anymore right away, I could feel in my body how it was gumming things up and creating excess mucus and becoming a burden on my systems. And you become more sensitive to that as we listen to our bodies more and get more in tune with our body's natural self-regulatory and self-healing capacity, you know. And so big, you know, oftentimes, and I would say most often, if we have some kind of ailment, especially around the womb, herbs alone are not going to do the trick. Okay, vaginal steaming alone is not going to do the trick. When I help people with vaginal steaming and with creating an herbal plan, it always includes looking at aspects, lifestyle aspects, dietary aspects, and emotional healing aspects, emotional and trauma healing aspects that are being unaddressed in their life. And that womb ailment is guiding them along that path and will be persistent and will persist until all of those layers of the healing process have been addressed.
Like a little signal.
Exactly. And the herbs are supportive of that. They give us the nutrition and the support that we need to go through that healing process, but they're not going to remove the need for that healing process. And thank goodness, you know, when people end up getting a hysterectomy because they have a lifetime of emotional and physical and lifestyle choices that were detrimental to their womb wellness, just having the womb removed did not address that lifetime of healing that needs to happen. And oftentimes lifetimes ancestral healing we're talking about. So in my healing programs, we work with bringing that healing to the ancestors as well, because how many generations of women have suffered to bring us to where we're at now, even more than we do today. They, you know, for all the different ways, we could totally go into that if you want.
That would be a whole nother
thing.
Yes. maybe another time.
Yeah.
So let me see. I think, well, I'm trying to think if we have time for one more question. So, well, we'll just, since you have to go soon, I just want to maybe talk about, I know you have 2 books, the Herbal Womb Wellness and Biomystical Womb Healing books that are coming out. And then I also saw that you were working on an oracle deck. And so, and for everyone watching, there are links to all of Sama's links are in the description. So you should be able to access more information and her awesome podcast, which she's done since 2018. So if you want to hear about more of the Womb Health Center Healing Temple and the apprenticeship that she has and all that stuff. So there's tons of more information. But yeah, just briefly, if you wanted to maybe tell us more about your books and maybe when they might be available for purchase and all that stuff, and then we'll have to say goodbye.
Okay. Well, the Herbal Womb Wellness book is actually going to be a workbook, which I haven't seen anything quite like it. There's one book out about vaginal steaming called Yoni steaming, and I have it in the other room. I don't have it here, but it's somewhat of a workbook in that it has some journal pages in there around some spiritual practices that go along with this author's approach to vaginal steaming. So, but it doesn't have so much about the herbs or creating a steaming plan for yourself, assessing your womb health, or any of that. I'm sure that if you went and worked with them as directly as a practitioner, they have a training program and like that you might get more of that, but the book itself doesn't have that. So I felt, there's other books that talk about vaginal steaming, but they don't have like a workbook format. And vaginal steaming is one part of it. It's not a central part of it. So I'm creating this workbook that where vaginal steaming is much more central, and it takes you through a whole assessment process based on imbalances that I work with as a certified vaginal steam practitioner through Kelly Garza's Steamy Chick training programs that are based on Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine ways of assessing and interpreting the message that our womb is giving us as a vital sign about our overall health and well-being. So looking at imbalances that the menstrual cycle is alerting us to, like uterine fatigue and why we might have that kind of fatigue if we're bleeding too much or too frequently. And we can't stop bleeding, things like that, and approaches to that. And by the way, if that's the case, vaginal steaming is counterindicated until that bleeding becomes under control, or that excess bleeding has stopped, because the vaginal steaming can induce more bleeding, and we don't want that when somebody's bleeding more than once a month, more than 4 days in the month. Things like that. And so this book will take you through. So there's the different imbalances that we look at in the book are uterine fatigue, stagnation, dampness, heat, excess heat, people who have hot flashes and infections and things like that. Digestive.
So it can be helpful for menopause.
Well, a lot of people have excess heat that aren't in menopause yet, and usually people who have hot flashes and heat condition in menopause, they've been having that all along, but not paying attention to it, not noticing it. And so we catch that earlier and catch all of these things much earlier if we start paying attention to it when those symptoms are small, before they become a crisis and a life-disrupting situation. And then if it is a life-disrupting situation, then we address that as well. And so all of the symptoms. Oh, and then there's also blood deficiency. So some people aren't bleeding at all or are bleeding very little. If you're bleeding less than 3 days a month, using less than 2 pads a day when you're bleeding, or maybe you're just spotting, then that's a sign of blood deficiency, nutrient deficiency, and that affects all of our organs. And our womb tells us what's going on. And so if your womb is deficient and can't have, or if your womb is fatigued and is bleeding too much, or is deficient in nutrients and is bleeding too little, then the same is true for all the rest of the organs in your body, but they're just not telling us, right? Later when we're having a heart attack or kidney failure or whatever it is, right? And so the womb is telling us, like the canary in the coal mine. And so I take everyone through an assessment process about their menstrual symptoms in the book, and then look at the underlying causes and have journal pages and guidelines for womb listening, which is my way of guiding people to access our intrinsic womb wisdom. And I'll also have pages in there about communicating with herbs and the womb listening with herbs, so that we're getting that wisdom and that activation of that communication. And so then you can journal in there and write in there the answers you're getting as you're doing those meditations. And you can check off and determine how strong you are on these with these imbalances. So if you have severe uterine fatigue, you'll have a higher score in this assessment process, and know that you need to attend to it with more intensity than if you have a lower score. So I'm making it so it's easy for people to understand where they're at, and then I'll be sharing herbs and ways of understanding and nourishing the menstrual cycle and nourishing our health. Through steaming and teas and topical treatments and things like that, all in the workbook. And there'll be planning pages for folks to create a plan for themselves. And then there's also recommendations for what kinds of practitioners you can get to support you in the process, and links to my herbal womb wellness coursework that's available online. So,
well, that sounds awesome. And it, and it's nice to have that kind of comprehensive guide. It sounds very everything you would need. And so that sounds great.
Yeah.
So real fast, Heather wants to know, can womb health help ease menopause symptoms? And I think you answered that it could be helpful in hot flashes before or during menopause. But
so what I want to say to answer that question is menopause symptoms are screaming out for us to tend to our womb health. That's what they are. They're a strong message from our body. That's what any symptom is in the body, is a message from the body to attend to your health. That's what it is.
Okay, Heather.
It's so simple. So that's what menopausal symptoms are. And they're often, what's the right word? All of the times that we neglected our womb health throughout our life add up to how loud our womb is screaming at us in menopause that you better pay attention to it now.
Yeah.
And even if you've gotten through all of that and you're no longer bleeding and maybe your symptoms have subsided, if you didn't attend to your womb health, or maybe even you had a hysterectomy, if you didn't attend to all these layers of your womb health before that, but now suddenly things have stopped, it doesn't mean that the reasons for all that have ended. In fact, I know quite a few womb wellness practitioners who only got into womb wellness after they'd had a hysterectomy or their menstruation had stopped and all their symptoms had stopped, and they wished that they had learned about it earlier, but they're going to be devoted to it now because it's helping to transform their lives in positive ways. It's getting at the root causes of why their womb was so unhappy with them their entire life, right? Why their womb was so unhappy, and their own core essential dissatisfaction with life, and what was getting in the way of them expressing their core essence and becoming their core essence in life. So our womb is the center of where our spirit embodies. And if we're ignoring those messages all of our lives, then we're ignoring how our spirit wants to embody and what our soul purpose is. So this is where I go with my biomystical womb apprenticeship, is those who want to heal that rift between biology and mysticism that we've been taught exists, that's a complete fallacy and a lie. And separates ourselves from deep satisfaction on our human journey.
Heather has a question, but Heather, I don't think we have time for it.
Give me a shot at
it. Okay. So she says, say women who have no symptoms and ease through menopause have healthy wombs, ? So if you have no symptoms during menopause, do you or do you not necessarily have health? Does that mean you have healthy womb?
That's possible. It doesn't mean you're 100% healthy across the board. Okay. My mom had very minor menopausal symptoms, but she also was suffering from a lifetime of suppressed emotional trauma and generations worth of emotional trauma. and it didn't show up in her womb with those symptoms per se, but it showed up in her bladder, for example,
Okay.
and her kidneys, and now it's showing up in her nervous system and things like that. And so the womb can be very good at hiding things and being numb and and keeping it a secret. Okay.
So if you can have those, so those messages, if you get them, are very good. You know, if you can get them early, that something's off, instead of, and you know, so where I hold everything is in my digestive system. So when I had to start dealing with that, it just transformed my whole life. Like
Yes.
you know, like I had to change everything that I did. So I totally see what you're talking about. Yeah. So I hope that.
So, yeah. The womb. What often happens is we go numb in the womb space because of the constant onslaught of exploitative, traumatizing messaging that we get from our patriarchal society around the womb. Okay. And so a lot of people have gone numb there and don't have any symptoms at all. And that doesn't mean they're as healthy as they could possibly be in the womb space. Like my mom, when she started doing womb awakening work with me and womb healing work with me, suddenly her womb is coming alive and pulsing like a second heart, and guiding her with wisdom and her creative process and all of these other aspects to it that she didn't even know existed.
So probably all of us could benefit from womb wellness and paying attention to our womb and doing some sort of work with our womb, because of all the stuff that we talked about earlier about how we came to this point, and how this is you know, how the womb and all the our period and all the stuff, all the cycle is treated and perceived throughout, you know, a large portion of history. So, well, awesome. Well, thank you, Sama. Sama has to go. When Sama leaves, I'll wrap up with everyone. So, and I'll introduce you to our next person that we're interviewing a little bit. But thank you so much for talking with us. It was awesome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jennifer. It's lovely to be with you today.
Nice to meet you. So guys, just check out Sama's podcast and her website if you want to know more about it. And we will all keep an eye on your awesome workbook that's going to come out at some point.
I'll share a link. I'll share a link for pre-sales with you. It's not launched yet, but I think I have a link where people can follow and make sure. I'll get that to you so you can add it to the description. So
awesome. That'll be cool, because we have a herbal book club which you have joined, and we've been talking briefly about like doing, because a lot of the women that are in the book club are sort of around. We've been sort of talking about visiting this book,
Susan.
Just because of a lot of women that are in the book club are kind of around the same age, and we're like, hey, this is very topical. But anyway, I digress. So we're like, maybe we'll dive into your workbook a little bit. We'll see. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, when it's published, that's going to be later on in the year. Right now, I'm just gathering pre-sale interest and finishing, the process of getting it published. So.
All right. We're excited in the chat about it.
So, all right. Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you. Have a lovely rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon later.
All right. Okay. Sounds good. Take care. Bye now.
Bye. Okay, guys. Well, now that we're alone. Oh, yeah. So Heather shared the womb center shared a link to the book, I think, Heather. So, I hope everyone had as much fun as I did. I definitely learned a lot, and it's a huge topic. We could have probably talked for another hour or so, but so I am going to tell you about who's coming up next. So our next interview is going to be on the 1st of September, and it should be at 1 p.m. Eastern. And I'm going to be interviewing Karen Savage, owner of Savor Shrub Bitters, and they are an aromatic fruit and herb concentrate preserved in living apple cider vinegar. You can enjoy them neat in a seltzer, as a mixer, or even hot, like a toddy or a tea. She incorporates herbs. So she has an Etsy shop as well as a website. And one of her mix is strawberry balsamic schizandra. That's honey, apple cider vinegar, ginger, dandelion, schizandra, strawberries, elderflower, lemon zest, and orange peels. That sounds awesome. And another one is blueberry, lavender, lemon. It's blueberry, elderberry, lemon, lavender, honey, apple cider vinegar, dandelion, and ginger. So it sounds, her bitters sound really awesome. And they have like a huge herbal component. So I'm really going to be excited to talk about that. And of course, we'll talk about herbalism in general as well. Because believe it or not, there's a few questions that I still haven't gotten to ask anybody, because they have so much to say, which is good. So sometimes the conversation just goes where it wants to. So, which is fine. We take a little journey, a little detour. Okay, I'm a babbling. Hold on. Okay, so if you are interested in more Stories for the Earth info, there's a Facebook group. The link's in the description for anyone who wants to be interviewed, or anyone who just wants to keep up with what's going on. You can be an herbalist, you can be a gardener, you can be someone who does wild food, someone who does wild crafting, someone who's studying herbalism, someone who's just loves herbs and plants and uses them in their everyday life. So it's a wide variety of people that can be, that I'd like to interview. I also have a Patreon page if you'd like to support these interviews along with this channel with your dollars. So the link is in the description. And so there's some awesome Patreon rewards, both herbally and tarot. I have a Seawool Herbs. I have an Etsy shop called Seawool Herbs. Those links are there. So I just want to thank everyone again, and I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did. So thank you for hanging out with me. All right, so I will see everybody next time. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments, and I will answer them. And I will post that link for Sama's book whenever she sends that to me, so we can check that out, because it really sounds awesome. So all right, guys, I will talk to you later. Okay, bye.